great documentary about Freedom Summer in Mississippi, and there's a nice clip in there about Miss Fannie Lou Hamer, but that's okay. It was just going to give us a little bit more context for her. So this session, this next 40 minutes or so, is just to kind of dive in a little bit to one of the folks that's already been talked about, and we all know Miss Fannie Lou Hamer and her incredible strength and determination. And the piece that when I learned about Fannie Lou Hamer, I also had never heard about her until I started to experience the trips and to dive into the history of Alabama and Mississippi. And she got recruited into the civil rights movement a little bit later than many. She was in her 40s, early 40s, when she heard James Bevel preach in a church in Ruleville, Mississippi. And Bevel talked about registering to vote, and she had never heard that she could register to vote. And so she was really moved by this and went down and proceeded to register to vote, which led to her getting forced by her sharecropping owner of where she worked to have to choose between either registering to vote or staying or keeping her job. And she just said, I'm going to register to vote. I'm doing this for me. And so she lost her job. And when she lost her job, Miss Hamer and her husband, Pap, Perry Hamer, who she called Pap, left their space they were working in on this farm / plantation, and more or less went off the grid. They disappeared for a while, and they went into some of the backwoods areas of Mississippi where they had liked to go and fish and be by themselves and secure. And they were there at a cabin deep in the woods of Mississippi. And James Bevel asked Charles McLaurin, who was a local SNCC person, to go find her because he really wanted her to come and get involved in the movement and to speak and to be an inspiration. And I believe this was all in 1962. And McLaurin couldn't find her, but he started asking people, do you know where Mrs. Hamer might be, or where Mr. Hamer where they might be? And he got some clues, some tips, and made his way into the woods. And so he tells this story in a great book by Kay Mills called This Little Light of Mine, which was her favorite song, of course. And Charles McLaurin tells this story of he finally found where they were, and they were in a cabin. And so it was pouring rain, and he knocks on the door, and Mrs. Hamer says, come on in. Nobody comes to the door to check who it is, just says, come on in. And McLaurin opens the door and goes in, and Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer is across the room, bent over a fireplace, and is cooking over the fireplace. And he's totally soaking wet. And he's, feels awkward and all in this, and she said, and he says, I'm Charles McLaurin, and Reverend James Bevel sent me to find you. I'm going to ask you to come be part of the civil rights work that we're doing, the fight for civil rights and the right to vote. And she turned around and she looked at him, and she said, I'll be ready in a minute. And she walked into her room, packed her bag, and left. And Pap Hamer said, you got my blessing, go right ahead. And she turned and changed her life on a dime to do this work because she felt so strongly about it. I mean, she joined the movement and became this incredible inspiration to so many. Bob Moses has described her as the essence of SNCC in Mississippi. She represented the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the embodiment of it from the community, from working class, that she was just vital. She was instrumental. And because of that, she's instrumental when the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party is formed in 1964 to show America that even though African Americans could not vote in Mississippi, they would still, they wanted to, and giving a chance to even run a mock secondary election that didn't have any official status, that they would take that advantage, that opportunity to run into this election and to vote, to show and dispel the myth that Black Americans didn't really want to vote. And so they ran these shadow elections all the way through 1964, the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, because they weren't allowed to be part of the Mississippi Democratic Party, which was a white-only party. And hundreds of thousands of African Americans in Mississippi voted in these Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party elections. And Mrs. Hamer was a candidate for Congress as part of these elections. And it was a way to show the nation that these folks wanted the right to vote really, really badly. And so it all led to going to the National Convention in Atlantic City in 1964, when Mrs. Hamer and the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, with Bob Moses at the forefront of this, went there to contest the all-white delegation from Mississippi that was the official delegates to the 1964 convention in Atlantic City. And they went there and they wanted to become the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party said, you should seat us, because they were an integrated, they were not Black only, they were an integrated party. You should seat us and you should not seat the white delegates. And they made an appeal to the Rules Committee of the Democratic National Committee, Democratic National Convention. Lyndon Johnson wanted none of this to happen. He didn't want his precious convention to be disrupted. And the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party went to the Rules Subcommittee and made their case for why they should be seated, and not the white-only Mississippi Party. In that testimony, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. testified on their behalf, and Fannie Lou Hamer became the star witness for them. And so she testifies for them. And here's a person that has never been on the national stage in this kind of way. She has been a leader in the voter registration work in Mississippi, and only for a couple of years, and doesn't have the kind of education that a Dr. King has, who has a PhD. Has been a national spokesperson for the movement. And so she gives her testimony at the Democratic National Committee to the Rules Subcommittee. And this is that testimony. And what made it so powerful was the rawness of it. There was no attempt to put it into million-dollar words or to shepherd, to kind of hide the violence towards Black Americans in Mississippi. So I want to listen to, and that's all we have is the audio, is to listen to this, and then to bring it back to some of the comments that were made earlier about Fannie Lou Hamer by us that were here, about her as an inspiration and why she is, and just to connect it in the context of hearing this speech. I have never heard the entirety of the speech until about an hour ago when I listened to it. And so it's only 10 minutes long. It's the full speech, because I've never found the entirety of the speech. Dr. Terry actually got it from the Library of Congress and shared it with us. So I'm going to play the audio here. Okay. This is just a little advertisement setup right here.
Mr. Chairman, and to the Credentials Committee, my name is Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer, and I live at 626 East Lafayette Street, Rooseville, Mississippi, Sunflower County, the home of Senator James O. Eastland and Senator Stennis. It was the 31st of August in 1962 that 18 of us traveled 26 miles to the county courthouse in Indianola to try to register to become first-class citizens. We was met in Indianola by policemen, highway patrolmen, and they only allowed 2 of us in to take the literacy test at the time. After we had taken this test and started back to Rooseville, we was held up by the city police and the state highway patrolmen and carried back to Indianola, where the bus driver was charged that day with driving a bus the wrong color. After we paid the fine among us, we continued on to Rooseville, and Reverend Jeff Sonny carried me 4 miles in the rural area where I had worked as a timekeeper and sharecropper for 18 years. I was met there by my children that told me the plantation owner was angry because I had gone down, tried to register. After they told me, my husband came and said the plantation owner was raising Cain because I had tried to register. And before he quit talking, the plantation owner came and said, Fannie Lou, do you know, did Pap tell you what I said? And I said, yes, sir. He said, well, I mean that if you don't go down and withdraw your registration, you will have to leave. Said then if you go down and withdraw, that you still might have to go because we're not ready for that in Mississippi. And I addressed him and told him that I didn't try to register for you. I tried to register for myself. I had to leave that same night. On the 10th of September 1962, 16 bullets was fired into the home of Mr. and Mrs. Robert Tucker for me. That same night, 2 girls were shot in Rooseville, Mississippi. Also, Mr. Joe McDonald's house was shot in. In June the 9th, 1963, I had attended a voter registration workshop, was returning back to Mississippi. 10 of us was traveling by the Continental Trailway bus. When we got to Winona, Mississippi, which is Montgomery County, 4 of the people got off to use the washroom. And 2 of the people to use the restaurant. 2 of the people wanted to use the washroom. The 4 people that had gone in to use the restaurant was ordered out. During this time, I was on the bus. But when I looked through the window and saw they had rushed out, I got off of the bus to see what had happened. And one of the ladies said it was a state highway patrolman and a chief of police ordered us out. I got back on the bus, and one of the persons who had used the washroom got back on the bus too. As soon as I was seated on the bus, I saw when they began to get the 5 people in a highway patrolman's car. I stepped off of the bus to see what was happening, and somebody screamed from the car that the fire workers was in and said, get that one there. And when I went to get in the car, when the man told me I was under arrest, he kicked me. I was carried to the county jail and put in the booking room. They left some of the people in the booking room and began to place us in cells. I was placed in a cell with a young woman called Miss Vesta Simpson. After I was placed in the cell, I began to hear sounds of licks and screams. I could hear the sounds of licks and horrible screams. And I could hear somebody say, "Can you say yes, sir, nigga? Can you say yes, sir?" And they would say other horrible names. She would say, "Yes, I can say yes, sir." So, "Well, say it." She said, "I don't know you well enough." They beat her I don't know how long. And after a while, she began to pray and ask God to have mercy on those people. And it wasn't too long before 3 white men came to my cell. One of these men was a state highway patrolman. And he asked me where I was from. And I told him Roosevelt. He said, "We're going to check this." And they left my cell, and it wasn't too long before they came back. He said, "You are from Roosevelt, all right," and he used a curse word. And he said, "We're going to make you wish you was dead." I was carried out of that cell into another cell where they had 2 Negro prisoners. The state highway patrolman ordered the first Negro to take the blackjack. The first Negro prisoner ordered me, by orders from the state highway patrolman, for me to lay down on a bunk bed on my face. And I laid on my face. The first Negro began to beat. And I was beat by the first Negro until he was exhausted. I was holding my hands behind me at that time on the left side because I suffered from polio when I was 6 years old. After the first Negro had beat until he was exhausted, the state highway patrolman ordered the second Negro to take the blackjack. The second Negro began to beat, and I began to work my feet. And the state highway patrolman ordered the first Negro had beat to sit on my feet, to keep me from working my feet. I began to scream, and one white man got up and began to beat me in my head and tell me to hush. One white man, my dress had worked up high. He walked over and pulled my dress. I pulled my dress down, and he pulled my dress back up. I was in jail when Medgar Evers was murdered. All of this is on account of we want to register to become first-class citizens. And if the Freedom Democratic Party is not seated now, I question America. Is this America, the land of the free and the home of the brave, where we have to sleep with our telephones off of the hook because our lives be threatened daily, because we want to live as decent human beings in America? Thank you.
Hey, Dave. Thanks. Thanks. At that convention, Lyndon Johnson pressured the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party to accept what he called a compromise where they would get 2 seats, 2 at-large seats on the floor, but that the full Mississippi white Democratic Party delegation would have all of their seats, and the Freedom Democratic Party would get 2 seats. That was the offer that was made ultimately to the Freedom Democratic Party. Dr. King recommended that they accept that offer, that he felt like it was something. Bob Moses and Fannie Lou Hamer, the 2 leaders of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party said no. They did not take that compromise, and they left. And they did not seat anybody at the floor. And many in the movement point to that period of time in Atlantic City and the negotiations and the way in which Johnson, who had already, pushed to pass the Civil Rights Act, at that point, was still undermining the movement and the goals of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. Many who were there in Mississippi in 1964 as part of the Student Nonviolent Courting Committee push said that they really lost faith in the American political system then. That was it. They just felt it was corrupt, that they had given this great good faith effort, and that they had been screwed over. And so it's a heartbreak to me. It's a heartbreak to me on multiple levels. But it did introduce Fannie Lou Hamer and her incredible leadership to the nation. Her speech was played live on recording in that evening on national television. And so she was introduced to the nation, and it helped to bring Mississippi into the 20th century.
David, may I make a statement?
Please do, Charles.
Yeah, I met Mrs. Hamer at a SNCC convention in Jackson, Mississippi in 1965. And one of the things I learned, not only from Mrs. Hamer, but people like Mrs. Hamer at a very young age, at that time we were very poorly educated and segregated and not very exposed. And our look at life was to look ahead and at educated people and to try to change and be one of those type of people. But one of the most significant things I learned at about 16, 17 years old, meeting people like Mrs. Hamer and Mrs. Hamer, is that how that people like her had a type of native intelligence, like she expressed at that convention, that I had not recognized at that point. And many other people like us had not recognized that. And meeting people like that, not only in Mississippi and in Georgia and in Alabama, taught me a very important lesson, is that and I saw it again when I was in Boston going to school. I saw people who I grew up with, the Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer types, who had never gotten an education, but had a type of natural intelligence that was never recognized until the civil rights movement gave them opportunity to highlight themselves and to show their potential. And having a forum like she had showed their natural intelligence and what they could have been had they had more opportunity. And sort of in a little way, that's what that insight, that meeting with people like that is what sort of gave me momentum to want to highlight that in a forum. And that sort of was one of the bases of why I started the Foot Soldiers Breakfast 20 years ago. Back to Boston again. We grew up calling each other, we never gave each other very much credit because we were taught to put each other down, and that was part of the way we were programmed. What I saw in Boston is what I saw in Mrs. Hamer. I saw people in Boston at Boston University, Brandeis, Harvard Business School, Harvard Law, guys who looked just like guys that I grew up with. We called them by their nicknames, Flathead or, Bubba or what you call it. And I saw in Boston as a very young student there being exposed to like that type of environment. And like I saw that the Flatheads and the Bubbas and the, people like that, there were people at Harvard Business School who looked just like them. And it amazed me. And I said to myself, wow, these are the type of insights I saw being in Boston, being exposed to a different culture. I said to myself, wow, Flathead could have been here too, had he had the opportunity. So it wasn't about intelligence in terms of Black folks not being educated like Mrs. Hamer. It was just simply the denial of opportunity. And so I've been very aware of that from that day on. And that's why I learned to not, I'm not sure if I'm expressing well, not to take people like Mrs. Hamer or people whose talents are not obvious for granted.
They were the ultimate foot soldiers, right?
Right.
So let's kind of go around here. Thanks, Mr. Charles, and you're welcome to join in at any point here, 100%. And then we'll talk specifically with you too. But I would really be interested, we got a small enough group here, to have each of us just kind of say whatever you want to say about why Fannie Lou Hamer for each of us means something. Okay, and Carmen and Celestia, you shared a little bit of this earlier, but I figured maybe 5 hours later there might be more there, and it's 5:47 for Celestria. I don't know what you're doing here, Celestria, at this time, but it's here. And Carmen, it's 6:47. I mean, you've been up all night, and it's 3:47 for me. And so profound things get said, or at least they seem very profound at this point in the evening. So let's just kind of each have the floor for a moment about Mrs. Hamer, anything you want to say, or anything that just is on your mind or your heart about her. And it can be anybody on this Zoom call: Sharnita, Barbara, Helen, Lily, Carmen, Ivory, Luke, Celestia. Mr. Charles, back to you again too, if you want to. So the floor is open for whoever.
All right, I'm jumping in. I think, David, I forget what hour it was, but a long time ago, you asked the educators, me and Ivory and Luke, how we would teach hope. And I remember my answer being yes, and right, taking every opportunity. And then you shared the story of Miss Fannie Lou Hamer just saying, give me a minute, and grabbing her bag and going. Um, and I think that's maybe why I'm so drawn to her, because she's the epitome of hope, right? Because she was just like, yeah, let's go. Let's go change the world. Um, with no hesitation, no reservations. She knew it was the right thing to do. And she knew it was the right time because she was asked to go. Kind of like how I think Luke was the one that said it at our last educator tour, when we were asked, why did we go? And Luke was like, well, Dr. Terry asked. And when she asks, you go. And I think it's just like, that's hope, knowing when the calling is there and knowing to answer the call. And she answered the call and she changed the world. And I think that's my appreciation for her. And it's starting to connect now, all these hours and all these things we're saying. There's a thread, it's happening. So that's my appreciation, seeing her as like that definition of hope for me.
Thank you, Carmen.
I'll follow up on that, excuse me, and say that Fannie Lou Hamer, I would say that she's like the other part of what this all is that determination. Because you got to have some kind of courage to be as Southern as she is and have the draw that you do to be on a national stage and be very vulnerable and share not just your American story, but a traumatic experience of you getting abused by a system that allows for that to happen, and to be courageous enough to still talk about that in the spirit of trying to get political power so that you can do something about it, is that other half of determination. And the fact that you can get the attention of the then president of the United States, who doesn't want your message to be heard. I just think that echoes or outlines how determined she was to overcome that circumstance. So
Thanks, Ivory.
and she's a patriot.
She is a fucking patriot. There's no question. Yes.
I'll go ahead and go. Just to kind of add on to what I said earlier, I think that when I think of her story, I think of how odds were against her in her life and how she still persevered and how she's still a model of hope for a lot of people. And yeah, I really reflect on her story and think of how if she could do it, what couldn't we do, honestly? So that's really it.
Thanks, Celestia.
I love the part of the story you were telling before, this kind of context to the speech, David, about um, her and Farmer and the others rejecting the quote compromise that Dr. King had encouraged them to take. Um, and I think that moment really that says a lot about her. And I think there's a lesson in that for us too, in that, you know, you can stand on your principles. You don't have to accept any less than you're owed, right? Like, um, and to do so to Dr. King, who's the, you know, the the face of the movement in that moment. And you're not just telling Lyndon Johnson no, you're telling him no. And that was the right decision to walk away from that and to make that statement. And so I think in that moment there's just an extraordinary example of the courage of convictions that she held and was a model for. Yeah, I found that really powerful.
Thanks, Luke. I don't think that I can't mentally conjure up in my mind the revolutionary change that she put her life through. I believe she was one of, I think, many kids, 12, 13, 18 kids. She was one of many, a lot of kids from the family she grew up in. And we're talking generations of enslavement and then sharecropping and oppression and discrimination, to then have someone show up at your church and in a very inspiring way talk about the possibility of the right to vote, and then going to vote and getting beaten on the way back so badly that she loses the ability to have children after that, and devoting her life from that moment that the James Bevel is there and preaches at that church to that revolutionary change is so hard for me to imagine it. And it's a courage that is both physical, but it's also very moral and tremendous faith that she had, like a woman of incredible faith, religious faith, and also just faith that there could be something better, something way better, like beyond believable better. And I just, her sense of determination, like that hope that would believe this, that this could be, and the determination to make it so, to push, to fight, to do all of that. It's mind-boggling to me to really think about it. And Mississippi is so violent. It has been, it is so racially violent. Mr. Charles, did you meet her at a SNCC convention or what?
Yes, I did. You know, her being inspired by James Bevel, many of us were inspired by people like James Bevel. What they did, we had a sentiment, a existential sentiment of being treated unjustly. We were very aware of our circumstances, but we didn't have the awareness, the ability to articulate that so that we could, and a mechanism by which we could act on that until people like James Bevel or James Orange or uh, there's a guy named James Love that nobody knows about who was very instrumental in the Selma movement. Young black guy, first guy I ever saw to wear an afro from New York City. Um, people almost nobody else know. They were the ones who tapped into our sense of like being treated inequitably, unjustly, inhumanely, and gave us a mechanism, a path out. And we rushed into it just like Mrs. Hamer did. We were waiting for something like that, but we didn't know what it was until someone helped us to identify it. And once it was identified, then all hell broke loose. There's no going back after that. It wasn't just true for heroes and heroines, but it was true for ordinary people. And again, I don't want to try to make a big thing out of it, but I saw that and I wanted to make sure that that sentiment, that acknowledgement, that insight that I got was spread because like many other people have said, there are heroes in all of us. And it's just not the Fannie Lou Hamers or the Martin Luther Kings or the James Bevel or the C.T. Vivians, the Bernard Lafayettes. It's in each of us. And I saw that come out. That's why James Orange always called everybody leader. He would call you leader. And what he was doing is making you aware that you can do what they did. And it's true for everybody on this panel. And, I've not lived up to mine in many ways. So I'm very much aware of that. But I at least know that that is something that is true for all of us. And I still am struggling with what do I do next?
I got an answer for you on that one, which is right here with us, and for as long as we're going. But I wanted to ask you, I wanted to kind of dive into some things with you, Mr. Charles, and everybody, this is an open conversation forum here. We got Mr. Charles, we're into the hour that's yours now, and really want to take advantage of that. And I want to just kind of maybe ask some questions that I haven't really I mean, I'm curious about, so here's one. Is there a moment that you can remember in your, I don't know if we call it awakening or decision to get engaged, like a singular moment when you remember you kind of going this direction and then shifting to go this direction in terms of your engagement with the fight for voting rights?
Yes, I'm the type of person, and you probably have noticed something like that about me. I don't know how you guys would express it, but I'm sort of type of person that if somebody has something to say in conversations, there are normally only 2 or 3 ways of looking at things. If somebody else will express it, I'm more than happy to let them express that and not be the one who feel like I have to say it too, or be the person to express that. And I was like that. I've been like that my whole life. And so I'm very aware of like when I made a decision to accept a particular type of responsibility.
Hmm.
I was at a meeting that James Orange organized at Brown Chapel Church in 1964. Uh, James Orange had come down from Birmingham, and maybe you all know James Orange, but he was called the Gentle Giant. James Orange he seemed like he was 6'6", 350 pounds. He was probably more like maybe 6'3" or 6'4", maybe 200 pounds, something like that. But I'm 120 pounds wet, so that's how I saw things. And James Orange had been a part of the Birmingham movement and had been inspired by Dr. King and his commitment to it, and had worked with the children in Birmingham. So he understood the importance of young people. And let me tell you something that's is very true. Um, the movement understood the importance of and the value of young people being highlighted, because nobody cared a damn about some old Negro getting his ass whooped, but everybody cared about little girls and little boys being beat.
Hmm.
And so therefore, in Birmingham and in Selma and other places, you know, we made sure in demonstrations that like women were put on the inside and insulated by men, and that and children were better protected than the larger people. But like we were aware of the need for publicity and sort of I won't use the word used, but we were used, and so James Orange sets up a meeting at Brown Chapel Church, and there were before the movement started in Selma, there was a lot of tribalism going on. For example, there were I lived in sort of on what they call the bottom on one side of Selma, and on the other side of the railroad track was the other side of the bottom. They were the rougher guys in the bottom, and we sort of got along, but we weren't compatible. In central Selma, there were like another group of folks who were basically neutralized, and I had friends there and throughout the city of Selma. I was that type of person. I was not into that tribalism type of sense. And then in East Selma, where my sister lived, over where Laney's is, that was the bottom. I mean, you didn't go there unless you get your ass kicked if you went over there. It was that tribal. And across the river, they called the people who lived out in Selma river rats. They weren't even allowed to come into Selma and date the girls who lived in Selma because it just wasn't tolerable. That was the type of atmosphere that existed because we didn't have a perspective until the Civil Rights Movement came. And so when the Civil Rights Movement came, we all began to meet, but there still was some tribalism. And to be honest, Hudson High had more people involved in the movement than all the other schools. And there was a guy from Lutheran, I don't remember his name, but he was up for being selected for the position at this meeting we were at. And there were other guys who were popular, like Hazel Chapman, who was a football player, and another guy who had been quarterback of the football team. They were much more popular than people like myself, but they didn't want to have their particular interest in football or in girls or whatever to take that responsibility. It was just they weren't willing to take that responsibility. So in fact, by default, I was sort of chosen because first of all, we had more people in that meeting to vote for me. And also so I was chosen, and it was at that exact point. And like I said, I'm a live and let live type of person. It was at that point that like I realized, and I wasn't excited about leading anybody. Like I still not. I'm if somebody else want to do it, I'm more than happy to let them do that. But like I'm the type of person that like once I accept responsibility, if you say 6 o'clock, I'm gonna be up at 5 to be at the meeting, and everybody knew that about me, And sort of one of the reasons I was chosen because people, well, for two reasons, I think. One is that I'm reliable, and people in small towns know where you're coming from. And second of all, people for some reason trust me, you know. And sort of those were probably the two reasons that I was chosen to provide that leadership. A third thing about me is that once um, I don't join, I'm not a joiner with organizations, I didn't join SNCC because I was from Selma. I didn't have to join somebody I was from Selma. I didn't have to join anybody. And so I'm not really a joiner. And but like once I accept the responsibility, I'm all in. I don't accept responsibility lightly, but once I accept responsibility, then I'm all in. That's why I've been really reluctant for you guys to sort of get me more and more involved. That's just the way I've been my whole life. And that was the way I was at that meeting at Brown Chapel. But once I got that responsibility, I march every day, and I march from the front every day. I remember J.O. Chestnut, I guess he probably read about me when he was getting his book written, said, well, Charles, everywhere I look, is Charles Mauldin said this and Charles Mauldin said that, or there's a picture of Charles Mauldin here and a picture of Charles Mauldin there. And I said, well, J.O., the reason there's a picture of me here and a statement about me everywhere is because I was always in front. That was the type of person I was, And so, yeah, that was the time I decided to accept the leadership of the Dallas County Youth League. And that's what led for me being number 6 in line and in the third line on Bloody Sunday, um, there for Turnaround Tuesday, there for many other minor demonstrations before then, and a marshal on the march from Selma to Montgomery. But like, people like yourself, David, and Dr. Scott, and people like the people who are on this panel have sort of highlighted to me. I never thought that was a big thing. And the reason I was at a funeral in Selma about a week and a half ago, and I was with some foot soldiers, and we were talking about like various things about foot soldiers and things like that. And one of the things I was aware of is that like, and they talked about what they did and how I came to the school one time and turned it out, and they were much younger than me. And but you know what? I was very aware of like what so many other people did because I was there every day, and so therefore, like I realized that like and you guys highlight the fact that what I did was special, but I saw what other people did was special too. And you guys have sort of made me realize that like that was very special, and I deserve credit for that. But also like I realized that like there were other people who did special things too, and like and I'm not sure if I'm expressing it well enough, but like nobody deserved because it maybe all of us deserve special credit for that because we did change history, but like it wasn't because one person did something special. It was because a lot of people did a lot of things special, and that's maybe what has me sort of straddling the fence when it comes to like trying to be recognized, especially for anything that I did.
Mr. Charles, on Bloody Sunday, um, that day, do you have a strong recollection of the lining up at the church? Or is there not really a memory of that day for you?
Sure. As a matter of fact, I remember meeting first at the location where Joanne sort of assembles her group when she gives them their rock. And the young met us out there and spoke to us there. And that's where we actually began to line up there. We then went around to the front of Brown Chapel Church. You know, I'm not sure. It may have been Reverend Abernathy who spoke, you know. I One of the things about all of that is that, you know, we did different things every day, and every day was important in terms of like us protesting. But you know what? It wasn't something that we kept checks on. What did we do today? I didn't have a journal that I kept. We weren't collecting history. We were making history. And when I say making history, not intentionally, but like simply trying to make a bigger, better life for ourselves. We didn't have the time to think about the big picture. It was a day-to-day struggle, you know, and it was a and so I do remember. I'm not sure how I got to be selected to be number in the third line. It was probably because like I was a student leader, and I'm not sure. For example, there were other leaders who had really been much more integral in getting the movement started than me. Charles Bonner, Cleophas Hobbs especially. And you know what? And people don't know Cleophas Hobbs, but his brother is the one who called us at the waterfront and told us about the young man who actually jumped out of the boat, swam across the thing, and helped save that brother who worked was co-captain of the boat. But Cleophas Hobbs was one of the most adamant foot soldiers and one of the first foot soldiers. And when the real story gets told about who did what, Charles Bonner, Cleophas Hobbs, Terry Shaw, Betty Fikes, Viola Johnson, her name is Dudley now. There's a guy by the name of Boise Reese. There's Willie C. Robertson. Willie C. Robertson was the first person who shed blood for the civil rights movement in Selma. He was the one who went to the drugstore and sat down and really that was probably the first direct action demonstration that started the movement. People like that that's why, like I said, you have to put yourself in perspective, you know, much more courageous than what many of the rest of us did. My first demonstration was maybe in '64, and I wasn't aware that this was a planned demonstration. I was aware that there was unsubtleness there, but like I didn't know about anything like what a movement was. And somebody organized we were caddies at the Selma Country Club that was segregated, and we were making 75 cents for 9 holes. We'd go over at 8 o'clock in the morning. And if you got a number between 1 and 10, you would stay over there until you got a bag, they called it. And if you didn't, you leave and come back over maybe around 12 or 1 o'clock. And we were being paid 75 cents for 9 holes. and $1.25 for 18, which would basically take up a whole day. There's a guy named Pappy. As a matter of fact, his sister became a city councilwoman, Benny Ruth Crenshaw. Her name was Benny Ruth Johnson at the time. As a matter of fact, she is probably cousin to my brother's wife. But like Pappy helped organize a demonstration. This was our first, and I'm not sure if there had been other, it may have been the first demonstration. I'm not sure of that. But so we went on strike. Bud Burns was a pro there. He threw golf balls at us and we had us running all over the place, trying to avoid all of that. And so we stayed off for a while. They decided to give us $1.25 for 9 holes and $1.75 for 18. So that was probably the first successful civil rights demonstration in Selma. And very few people have even heard this story before. Charles Bonner was a caddy, so he may, if I were to remind him, he probably would think of that in that perspective. But that was probably, and I'm speculating, may have been the first, and probably the first successful, had to be the first successful demonstration about an issue of civil rights that occurred in Selma. And sort of, but Cleophas Hobbs and people like that were the ones, and back to Cleophas, they were the first heroes. They have the Courageous Eight, who are the men and women who first started the movement with the Dallas County, and I've been up since 2 or 3. I can't think of the Dallas County Voters League.
Yeah.
They are given credit for being the people who actually were instrumental in sustaining the movement, getting the movement started and sustaining the movement. But it was those people that I'm naming now: Charles Bonner, Terry Shaw, Cleophas Hobbs, Boise Reese, Willie C. Robertson, Betty Fikes, Viola Johnson. They are the courageous, the students who were the courageous, whatever number it is that we end up doing, and somebody needs to write that down. As a matter of fact, I recommended to Joanne that, like, rather than put the Courageous Eight in her building, that and not that they don't deserve credit, but for what really started the movement, those people that I'm naming now are the people who were the people. They were the courageous students, the outstanding students who started the Selma movement. It wasn't Reverend Reese and Mrs. Boynton and all those other folks. It was these people that I'm naming. And they are the ones who should be in the building at the foot of the bridge, just to highlight who really started the move, not who were the sentimental leaders of the movement and the recognizable adults in the movement, but they were the ones who actually started the movement. The others sustained the movement and were instrumental in doing work, but the actual movement was started by these people that I'm naming.
So in your town, like what was the percentage of people, say, in your neighborhood that actually participated?
Who knows? There were different people, different days, As a matter of fact, we would meet each day, and whoever showed up is who we went with, and there were some people who were consistent. There's a guy by the name of Ed. Let me see what Ed's last name is. There were some people who were there every day. And that was one of the reasons when we got to Lowndes County and 300 people would be chosen, is that Andy Young came to me and said, Charles, he said, who basically were the most consistent in terms of, and most committed. help us determine, and I didn't understand the implications of that at the time, help us decide which of these young people will be given the opportunity to march through Lowndes County, because it's going to be restricted to 300 people. And so everybody else would have to turn around. And I sort of, and I can't think of his name now because I've been up since 2, but you know, he was one of those people. And another person was Albert Southall, and another guy who ended up being put on a stamp with a flag on it was named, as a matter of fact, he lived up the street from me. As a matter of fact, he lived up the alley from me. And his name was Lewis Marshall. His nickname was Big June. And he was one of the people who actually was memorialized on a U.S. stamp.
So there's more people that came out and turned out for different things than actually got to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge that day. Is that what
No,
you're
it
saying?
no, it wasn't the Edmund Pettus Bridge.
Oh,
This
okay.
this were the 300 this were the people who were given were allowed to actually march. Lowndes County was a 2-lane road. And so
Okay.
the people who be determined that it was not safe for a large number of people to march
Oh,
through there, because
okay.
it would jeopardize public health. And so therefore it was decided, and Andrew Young came to me, and that there would only be a small number of people of all of the 5 or 7,000 or 10,000 that left Selma that on that Sunday would be allowed to actually march. And Lowndes County is about maybe 23 miles from Selma, so would be able to march through Lowndes County because the roads, the problem with the roads. And Andy came to me and said, Charles, help me decide which of the students will be allowed to actually be a part of that.
What was the public health problem?
Well, it was considered, the road only had 2 lanes, and they didn't
Oh,
want a large number of people crowding those lanes.
oh, okay.
I have kind of a 2-part question. So if you need me to repeat one part, let me know. But we were talking a lot about like just hope in general earlier. So I guess like, through all the violence and everything, and just not just like then, but just like you've continued this work since then up until the present moment, and like now we're like while we're on this call. How did you maintain hope? And then the second part is, was there like a specific moment where you realized the history that you guys had made, or like that you guys were making? Was there a moment where that clicked for you? Because you kind of spoke earlier about kind of realizing the gravity and the importance of the work that you were doing.
No, I don't really look at it like that. As a matter of fact, I sort of David, they're the history folks, right? And that's important to them. That's their thing, right? I'm just Charles Mauldin, who along with some folks that I grew up with, happened to make a commitment one time and did something that was pretty monumental. And people like David have been sort of letting me know how that important that is, right? But before that, to be honest, I never, as a matter of fact, Camus, who is Mrs. Boynton's grandson, his mother is a very close friend of mine. And one of the things he probably told David is that like he never knew that I was a part, and his mother and I have been friends for like 50-some years, and he never knew that I was a part of the civil rights movement, because when I get with my friends, we don't talk about that. That's the past for me, and sort of, and we talk about the future. And so therefore, it's been my involvement with Common Power that has brought that up as a important subject matter, you know, and And I probably talked about that more in the last 2 years than I've talked about it in the last 60 years. You know, I'm sure I have, you know. Um, and as a matter of fact, even this conversation we're having right now, I've never had a conversation like this with anybody this extensive.
Lily? Why Mr. Childs thinks what he did is no big deal, and that's fair. That's fair, Mr. Childs. Of course, you can, whatever you think, that's great. But Lily, why do you think Mr. Charles or Luke, maybe you can join in here too, as the teacher and the student here, Luke. Why do many of us want to hear this from Mr. Charles?
I mean, I think part of what's so like funny, but also like motivating and inspirational here is just the fact that like he just thinks of it as like no big deal. Um, he just like brushes it off, like, oh, I like just so nonchalant about it. But I mean, it's huge. Like that was such a massive, pivotal, important part of history. And um, yeah, think just, I think also, I don't know, I feel like there's such a like just humbleness, and I don't even have words to describe it, but it's really cool to hear him talk about it.
You know, I sort of really understand what happened there, but like, many of us were very careful not to, and like I said, it's not because I'm humble, it's because of like, I knew that I saw other people do great things, and it was all of us who made that happen. And there are some people who take a lot of credit for what they did doing Bloody Sunday and other things. And as a matter of fact, at this funeral I went to in Selma recently, the people who know what happened know the people who talk about what they did, and they comment on that to each other. And so I want to make sure that I wasn't, for example, you know what? And Jesse Jackson is a primary example of this, right? And you know what? One of the things you learn in the civil rights movement in all public situations is like how to get the maximum publicity if that's what you want, right? I mean, like there's a picture where like the top echelon of the civil rights movement took a picture. I think there was a Orthodox priest or something like that, Greek Orthodox, and with some other civil rights activists. And I remember people telling me, Charles, you know, you need to be up there because they wanted me to represent them. But, you know, I just didn't see myself going up there to be in that picture. And because I saw as a very young person, people always looking to be in the picture or wanting to like Jesse Jackson being in the right place at the right time to get publicity. And I decided, wanted to get the microphone. And I decided that like, I didn't want to be one of those type of people. And so therefore I probably overdid it, you know, but like, that was why I was not in more pictures that I'm in, right? Is because I knew that I was even encouraged to be in certain of those pictures, but like, I chose, not to do that because it seemed opportunistic to me. And for whatever positive things about myself, and you know, and I'm not sure if you know if it wasn't because who doesn't want recognition, to be honest, you know, but like at what cost to your value system was the issue with me. So I can't say that I didn't want recognition. I just say that I had to put the cost in perspective, and I chose not to take advantage of getting recognized in many cases when I could have been.
Mr. Charles, you're home, we're through the miracle of Zoom, we're in your home with you right now. And
Pardon
so
me?
through the miracle of Zoom, we're in your home with you right now. Like
Right.
we can see the wall behind you, right?
Mm.
And we tried on one of our trips to come swing by your house and to maybe look at some of the things you got on the walls. Would you be willing to like go grab one thing and come back and kind of share it with us and tell us something about it?
Yeah, let me see. Well, one thing I got on my wall is the 1984 buttons from Jesse Jackson's campaign in 1984. But I'm not a big Jesse Jackson fan, as you probably know. But it's art for me. But let me find something.
Okay. Man, oh man. This is why I'm up at 4:30 in the morning right here.
Yeah, Mr. Charles climbing a stepladder, David.
Mr. Charles, what are you doing back there? All right.
Yeah. Let me put my glasses on. Let me just see read what this says. Office of Lyndon B. Johnson, March 13th, 1969. Dear Mrs. Wells, on behalf of Mr. Johnson, permit me to acknowledge your letter to him on March 5th, calling attention Mrs. Thomas Mauldin's active exercise of her citizenship. As the first registrant under the Voting Rights Act of 1965, one of the great landmark legislative acts of President Johnson's administration, she wrote her name into American history. The voting certificate itself, of course, is now the property of the United States Civil Service Commission. Please convey Mr. Johnson's regard to Mrs. Mauldin. Sincerely, W. Thomas Johnson, Executive Assistant. This is Mrs. Janet Well, Voter Education Project, Southern Regional Council, Inc., 6 Forsyth Street, Northwest, Atlanta, Georgia. John Lewis was once head of this, the Voter Education Project. And this wasn't signed, but it was sent to me. They say that my mother was the first person to register to vote as a result of the passage of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. I've done some research and I know that I have her certificate. Well, let me just finish. That when President Johnson retired in 1969, there was a meeting at the White House of President Johnson and the quote Negro appointees to his administration, and that meeting was headed by Thurgood Marshall in representing the quote Negro appointees to the Johnson administration. And at that meeting, Thurgood Marshall and those other administrators gave President Johnson a pin set. And on that pin set was a replica of my mother's voting certificate showing that she was number 1. Now, I've done the research and I found that like she was number 1. And when I saw that my mother was number 1, knowing the relationship between my mother and my father, I looked to see where my father was. And as not to my surprise, my father was number 2 to register to vote in Dallas County. Now, whether they were number 1 and 2 in the nation, as the president's office said, I'm not sure. I doubt it. There were probably other people voting at other places, so I don't, make big hay of that. But I know for sure that my mother and my father were the first and second people to register to vote as a result of the passage of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. And more importantly, the fact that I got my ass whooped on the Edmund Pettus Bridge is what drew them into it. They were just natural old Black folks doing what they do every day, trying to make a living, keeping their nose clean until I got my ass whooped. And that's what brought them out. So in fact, what got them registered to vote is the fact that they had stake in the game. It was their son being beat on Bloody Sunday on the bridge. And my mother made a statement, and I have as a matter of fact, let me show you something. I'm not sure if you can see this. That is a card of my mother and my father. And on it, it says, let me see what it says. It says, if it hadn't been for the teenagers that got out there, there never would have been as many registered. They gave their parents courage. So that's what, as teachers, you can take to your students. Young people are the ones who gave old folks courage. That's why, again, back to the courageous students who started the movement, they should get their recognition. It was us who encouraged. It was us who started the Teachers March. It was us who brought the Reverend Reeses and the Mrs. Bournesons out into the streets. You know, and so at one point, those folks who started the movement needs to give their desert their credit. And so I got a lot of stuff around here. As a matter of fact, I got a trunk of stuff. Back to the visit, you know, I'm not sure if that would have, you know, 28, 29 people in my house. I'm not sure how that would have worked out. But, you know, I'll figure out something to do with all this stuff. You know, as a matter of fact, I have a picture of me and John Lewis. I don't normally take pictures with people because I just haven't I've never done that too much, but I realized the last time John Lewis at Brown Chapel Church, it would probably be his last trip there. So I made sure I got a picture with John. So I have a picture of John's last visit to Selma also here.
So I have a question. Like you said, you got your ass whooped, and like that's one thing. The physical courage. How did you sustain your involvement, knowing that could happen, did happen? How did you carry on?
You know what? David and I've been able to witness some of that. You know, I probably suffered from a lot of trauma from that. And I didn't recognize that until I started associating with David and going through the legacy museums and some really pretty lynching things like that. You know, I have a lot of buried hurt inside. And sort of what I did was to sort of steel myself into so that I wouldn't bring all of that, those experiences back up. So I wasn't afraid because I'd sort of put myself in a space where like I couldn't be hurt. And sort of I had no sense of fear because I'd sort of gone past that. And I sort of am probably still began to realize what real effect that had on me. But let me tell you one of the most heart-rendering experiences I had as a result of Bloody Sunday. My favorite teacher, Mrs. Parrish, and David, her daughter was the one who moderated the last Foot Soldiers breakfast. And let me just say this about Common Power. Had it not been for the support the Foot Soldiers breakfast got this year from Common Power, it probably would not have existed this year. And so, David, so, you know, like this isn't a plea for next year. It's just a recognition of what you did this year. So thank you for that. But
Of course.
back to one of the most humbling experiences I had as a student leader. And Mrs. Parrish was my 7th grade homeroom teacher. And she had 2 daughters, one who moderated the breakfast for us this year, the Foot Soldiers breakfast. Her name is Nadine, was my classmate. And we respected our teachers to the hilt. They were the most middle class, the only middle class people in Selma. So we had total respect for them. And Mrs. Parrish came to me and said, Charles, I'm going to let my daughters march, but please take care of them. And sort of for to have your teacher, when you're in the 11th grade, come to you and say, take care of my children, was one of the most humbling experiences I've ever experienced in my life. So I'm not aware of exactly what happened, but Phyllis, her oldest daughter, was marching on Bloody Sunday, and I've heard, and I'm not aware of what actually happened because there was so much happening at that time. But she says that a state trooper was about to attack her with a billy club, and that I took the hit for her. I don't remember any of that, but that was her statement. So to have your teacher come to you and then you respond to that and have her daughter tell me that that was true was a very humbling experience.
Thank you for sharing that, Mr. Charles. If you could put it as plain as possible or as simple as possible, what would you say is your hope for not just the work that we do, but like the conversations that like this that we're having? I mean, the talks from the tour, just what would you say is like your hope for all of the work that you and many others have done? Like what is your hope in terms of how that continues, or your vision for what tomorrow looks like for all of us?
You know, I give thought to what my highest and best used is a real estate term, but it's also a human term, is for this stage of my involvement in whatever I do. So I give it a thought on a constant basis. And I have no idea what the next. I know what the next till December will involve. It'll be a meeting in Atlanta in July with some children, evidently. I've talked to Larcy about that. It'll be like two tours in September and one in December. After that, like I'll sit down, or before that, I'll sit down and talk to David about the best way for me to contribute, given the type of limitations that I bring to the table at this stage of my life. And we'll decide, like, uh, what I can contribute, if I can contribute, and we'll both decide, how that works out.
What are your thoughts, Mr. Charles, on Donald Trump? Because I know you're pretty dialed into the news, okay? And what is your thoughts about Donald Trump and George Wallace, the kind of like putting those two side by side?
Donald Trump is a lot sicker, you know. George Wallace had a malevolent side to him, but he wasn't. He knew right from wrong. I don't think that Donald Trump has a capacity to distinguish right from wrong. There is a serious discrepancy somewhere in his somewhere, and he has a capacity to linger inside of a lie. Like I had a girlfriend in college one time, and she was cheating, right? And I confronted her, and she just told me that it wasn't true. And like what she did was continue to tell me that it wasn't true. And what shocked me is that I knew it wasn't true, but I was accepting the fact that she was that she was telling the truth, right? And so that's what Donald Trump knows, is that if you like birtherism, like so many other things, like being on television recently, he will sit up and tell a lie and persist with it. And eventually, many of us will concede to that being acceptable, regardless of whether we identify it as a lie or not. We accept it as being acceptable. He has a type of strange capacity for being very good at that. And so that's why I said that, like, it's beyond malevolent. It is sort of that's why it's intractable. it's hard to change. He lives it for real. So I know it's true, but I haven't quite figured it out. How he's able to live inside of that reality and make it real for him, and therefore make it real and believable for other people.
Yeah, do you think Wallace lied like that, or was Wallace just more of somebody who used racism for his purposes? But did Wallace lie like Trump lies? It doesn't seem like Wallace lied that way.
You know, Wallace grew up in a racist society, so racism was natural for him. It was he was he it was a part of his culture. It was like breathing the air. It was natural for him to be a racist, you know, in like, and you've said this before, he wasn't as racist as some other folks, but a little bit of racism is still racism, or a medium amount of racism is still racism, or a lot of racism is still racism. It's just that like he had some room to at least moderate that. Donald Trump doesn't have the ability to moderate what it is about him that makes him so treacherous. He doesn't have the capacity to moderate that. It's like I said, I can't describe it, but like it's real for him, and he can't. That's why he giving him power like this that he's just been given.
Yeah.
He will not. He will use it. You know, I have no doubt that he will use it because he will he doesn't have any sense of restraint once he decides to go in a certain direction. We see that all the time. We just haven't seen how monumental it can be.
Yeah.
Just think that a person who was president of the United States encouraged people to attack the Capitol because he lost an election. Think how absolutely astounding that is, and still is going around acting like everything is normal, and have other people, 70 million people, think that that's normal too. That's quite a unique character. That's pretty peculiar.
Yeah, that's right. That is really peculiar. That's totally right. Yes. What are you determined about right now in your life, Mr. Charles? What do you what does determination mean to you right now?
Um, you know what? I've never had a normal life. You know, I've always been busy with something. Um, uh, Normally, I'm always busy with somebody else's business, right? You know, instead of at this stage, I'm trying to figure out if it's possible for me to um, be determined about like if that's, you know, and I have no idea whether that's possible or not, you know, determined about like what do I do for the next 15 or 20 years that you know, or how do I blend being satisfied with myself and also being satisfied with what I'm doing for others. That's what I'm determined to try to figure out in the next 10, 15 years. You know, like, and I say it all the time, um, I'm that's why I never join groups and stuff. I'm a very personal person, really. And that's why maybe it's, you guys say it's humble. It's not humble. It's just that like, I've been sort of institutionalized since I was 15 years old, you know, and sort of and luckily it's been institutionalized in the civil rights movement. For one, I was thinking about a job I had with an organization in Boston. What was the women's organization in Boston? It was it was being led by Dr. Alvin Poussaint of Harvard University. He was a psychiatrist. He was a person who basically was a consultant with the Bill Cosby show. I worked with him in 1960, probably 68 in Boston. The Welfare Rights Organization, something like that. So I've been involved in one movement or another my whole life, and maybe at least 60, that's about 61, 62 years of that. So I haven't that, so even when I was not directly involved, I've always been involved psychologically.
I just want to tell you, as a woman and as a daughter of a teacher, that story you told about your teacher asking you to protect her daughters, that's just, you should be very proud of that and what you did.
Yeah, and especially because of the teacher that I had a tremendous, she was one of my favorite teachers.
Yeah. I would have been really honored to have been protected by you. Would have been very comforting.
Mm.
I'm sure you were really a great comfort to them.
Well, to put your two daughters on the line in Selma, Alabama, when in fact you had the option of not having that happen and possibly could lose your job if that happened. So that was pretty courageous on her part.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why I was asking you, like, what percentage of people in the town, so to speak, how select was this group who were active?
You know what? At a certain point, and there were different stages. At a certain point, either physically or psychologically, except for a very, very rare few, the quote Toms of Selma, right? And that was very, very, at a certain point, the entire city was motivated, either physically involved or psychologically involved, or somehow supportive. Some people did outstanding things, and other people just did small things that were helpful. What made the Selma movement is that, and that's what, back to the word, and we mentioned this on the last trip we made, you can sort of sense when a movement is occurring because there are certain factors that occur, and there's a type of spirit that you can sense. And what happened in Selma changed the psychology of Selma, not immediately, but like it was the beginning of a change that was over 100 years old of suppression. And now that I think about one of the things I'm proud of, I guess it's pretty important to recognize the fact that I was a part of that. And that what happened in Selma spread throughout the whole country. And sort of, I guess it would be immodest not to at least recognize that.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Mr. Charles. I think this would be a good time to take a little break. Thank you for all your time. We'd love to have you stick around with us.
Okay, I'll get a cup of coffee and stick around and see what comes up next.
Great, because
Hey, it's been a great conversation. And like I said, I've probably have talked to you guys longer about more things than I've talked to anybody in the last 60 years. You know, surprisingly or not, you'd think that I would have not have done that, you know, but this has been one of the longest conversations I've ever had with anybody.
It's an honor, Mr. Charles.
With you too, David. I appreciate what you guys do.
Thanks. Luke, what do you got?
Yeah, just you had asked a little while back Lily to speak, and then if I had anything about why, like what I hope to take from, you know, conversations with Mr. Charles, and what do I get from it? And I just I get this right here. Yeah, Mr. Charles, you're incredible. You're a humble guy, but I think there's just, you know, that you sort of position yourself as this kind of average person who saw a moment and you participated in that moment and turned out to be this really big deal. And I just really appreciate, you know, your courage and your your ability to just, you know, show up and be your whole self. And I think that that's a really important thing for us to see. So thanks for being with us, you know, overnight tonight and so many times on learning tours, and for continuing to tell us your story. It's really valuable, and we just really appreciate you.
Yes, and Carmen, look forward to us getting together at your school sometime.
Yeah,
Haven't forgotten
let's
about
do
that.
it.
It's just a matter of
Yeah.
like when it's convenient for you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Awesome.